Hey, everybody. We are back here live with the Mystery at Blind Frog Ranch recap show brought to you by Blind Frog Ranch Outpost. I am sitting here with two amazing gentlemen that you guys all know and love. I'll start the introductions right away here. We're going to talk to Mr. James Keenan. How you doing this morning, James?
Doing well, David. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Hey, everyone out there, thank you for coming, by the way. And I want to tell you, you got to follow James. James absolutely is one of the most respected guys in my Rolodex when it comes to anything related to all the topics we're talking about here. Obviously, the Uintah Basin, Blind Frog Ranch, and just a whole slew of really valuable and phenomenal information. So follow James. You see at the bottom of the screen how to do that. And then, of course, Mr. Carl the Crusher. How you doing, Carl?
Oh, I'm doing good. Having a great morning so far.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Carl, obviously, you guys have to follow Carl. Carl does an amazing job with his investigations, with his interviews, with all that Carl does. And note, he's forgotten more about Unexplained and the science behind and the history and the folklore behind things than I'll ever know. So, guys, you got to follow Carl. You've got to follow James. And with that, I want to get into some really, really cool stuff. But before we do, guys, I'm really excited about today's recap because obviously the show is progressing along and there's some great stuff we're going to talk about there. But we're getting close to tour time out at the ranch. So for those of you that have never been up to Utah, you got to come up and you got to check out Blind Frog Ranch Outpost, which is who sponsors this show. That's what we're doing here. We have all the official Blind Frog Ranch gear, everything from the hats, the mugs, the stickers, the magnets, and of course, every time we do a special, and the special this week is the Steel Travel Mug. We're doing 15% off. Use the BFR Coffee Time coupon code when you're purchasing, and you'll get 15% off your mug. But of course, I've always got mine. I'm using mine here, so we've all got our gear. We love our gear, but the tours. So the tours are coming up, guys. You can pre-order a tour right now. You can actually go out on the ranch. You can check out all the same areas, the pond, the tree, all of the cool stuff, the energy zone that you see on the show. And we believe, this is tentative, we're going to have things open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, April 1st through 16th. And then we look to open again May 18th on through the end of summer. Of course, weather permitting. So what you can do, guys, is go to the site, pre-order some tickets, and then as soon as we do lock those dates in, you'll get first pick of the dates that are available, and we'll get things rocking and rolling with tours out at the ranch. You guys have been out at the ranch. It's gorgeous, is it not?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's wilderness and mountains, bit of the desert, everything rolled into one.
Absolutely. And Carl, you've been out there, and we've had some fun experiences with you as you were running around checking out all the cool stuff. I want to ask you this. There's one portion in the tour where you actually get to kind of sift through the sand and find those little ancient beads. Did you find a bead when you were there?
Yeah, we found beads and a lot of interesting stuff around the entire area. Just the entire drive out there to the different locations it was like feeling like going to Jurassic Park or something. It was really a cool experience. And yeah, the geography and the geology of the whole place is interesting. And then being able to look for the ancient beads, the whole experience, it was a lot to take in a short amount of time. I want to go back already. It's really cool.
I was blown away the first time I did it, guys. I have to tell you a fun story about those beads. So first of all, the history of the beads are insane. They've actually had them checked out by a couple of different people. They believe that they're trading beads, right? And James, I know you're going to have more insight on that than I do. But I was told that they're handmade. They're tiny. They're almost hard, impossible to see. They're super tiny. I found one in my shoe the night after I was out there. I had a bunch of sand in my shoe, and I poured it out on the hotel table, and I had a red bead from the ranch in there. It was insane. But James, do you know about those beads? Can you tell me a little?
Yeah, I sure can. So a friend of the ranch named Sid Riker, who's been on the property for years and years, had been sifting through that even before Duane owned the property. And he did a lot of research into it and found out that the beige beads, which are very unique, were made up until 1894 out of Italy. And the individual, they know that it was till 1894 was because that individual passed away and he didn't have anyone that wanted to pick up his trade. So he had no one to teach it to. And they were actually able to track those colors. So a lot of those beads look to be in that same region. So we're talking a lot of them from 1850 to 1894, which would have been the exact time that the Ute came over to Utah. Around 1861 was when the reservation originated with Abraham Lincoln. So it's in the right spot. And it was just really interesting to have just so much historical data, and the ties to Italy was just phenomenal for out in the middle of nowhere in northeastern Utah to be pulling this out. And it's continuous.
And James, was this the same time in the era when the Mormon pioneers were moving in and all of that was also going on? So it was like a clash of cultures all happening at the same time up in that whole region.
Yeah, absolutely. The Mormons were rolling in the early 40s and starting to come into the Uintah Basin more and more about a decade later, which would have fit right into that time frame.
Well, and it's a trip to me that just to hold something that's that old, that is man-made, that is handmade, and that's that old. I mean, it's just crazy cool. It's just crazy cool. That's all there is to it.
Okay. Remember too, David, that there's these huge turquoise beads that are even older, and we don't know where those are from. So that might have been made by an indigenous tribe in the area or traded from far away. So that's really pretty cool too, because there isn't, looking up turquoise, there's no turquoise found in northeastern Utah. So it would be a lot further south, which is, again, showing these trade routes.
Okay, so that's the first I've heard of that, and I did see some turquoise ones. We've got a couple friends of the ranch up there who actually our guest is going to talk. He knows this gentleman too, Sid, who has found beads all throughout that area, and there's a lot of turquoise ones. That's crazy. I didn't know that those were the older ones. I thought that the tan ones were the oldest, but they're not.
Yeah, those were just the ones that we were absolutely able to trace back. Well, Sid was able to the origination point, which was this individual in Italy.
Wow, that's very cool. Very cool. Okay, so let me transition from there to our guest, because I'm super excited. We've got a gentleman that we know and respect, and is definitely a friend to the ranch and the whole basin. Let me bring on. Give me just 2 seconds here. Mr. Jordan McKee. Jordan, pleasure to have you with us. First and foremost, I want to say thank you for your service. You're an active member of the Army. Is that correct?
No, it is. It is. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. So for those of you guys that don't know, Jordan has been involved from the very beginning, guys. He's been in the area. He's done all sorts of exploring and research of his own. He's actually the facilitator of the original Facebook, which is actually right here. Let me pull this up here really quick, which is the Mystery at Blind Frog Ranch Facebook group, the original one. Correct, Jordan?
That's correct.
Awesome. And you've been friends, from what I understand, with Duane for much longer than I've even known Duane, and just the whole area. You grew up there, right?
Right. That's right. I grew up and had a bunch of crazy experiences as a kid and was just ultra interested in everything that was in the basin, and kind of grew up my entire life, dedicating my off time to researching.
That's so amazing. And Jordan, again, thank you for joining us and taking time out of your schedule. Listen, we were just talking a second ago about beads and things in the area. Do you have something to share on that front? Have you found some really interesting, cool things in your explorations since you've been there?
Absolutely. I mean, like James said earlier, which actually I didn't realize the origin of most of the beads, but I would say we probably found more turquoise beads than we did of the beige beads up there.
And that's insane.
And that's talking about just a small little portion. I mean, there's arrowheads, there's petroglyphs just right nearby that you can go see. And it's just incredible. You can find so much on the pottery. I think we found a couple of times.
So when you're finding this stuff, how do you qualify where it came from or the origins, or did you ever do anything with it, or were you just a kid saying, "Oh, that's cool"?
I mean, so it's kind of like, in the Army, you have what's called the private news networks where you talk to everybody and they have their best guess and you try and piece together pieces. But I think at the end of the day, you can safely assume that it was probably from Native Americans inhabiting the land, and the history of that's kind of lost to time. So it's a little bit difficult to know the exact when and the exact how it got there, but it's intriguing nonetheless.
So let me throw a question at you, because this is a big one for the purpose of the show and what they're doing out there. Do you believe that some of what is being found out there is traced back to the Aztecs?
I do. And the reason why I say that is because there's so much evidence that speaks about the ancestral homeland of the Aztecs actually being Colombia. And if you look at the Anasazi, the Puebloan people of Utah, you see a lot of the same influence in the Aztecs. So I, for one, I do believe that, it's very possible that we could see treasure from the Aztecs. Or
That's awesome to hear. It's funny because we get so many comments online and people following, and the show is really great. My hats off to Discovery and of course the production at Cargus Evan and all those guys, because they do a phenomenal job putting together a really, really giant story, bite-sized, so that they can actually make a show that people can watch and follow, because it is a lot. There's so much going on, and there's so much in that basin, and that's kind of why we're talking here today, because there's some really amazing things. Carl, you've out of the three of you, James and Jordan have been out there a little bit longer. Carl, you've come to the scene a little bit later, but your first interpretation of just being out in that land is that it's just incredibly rich with all sorts of things, correct?
Yeah, just the layers of the culture and how far back it goes is pretty mind-boggling. You could spend an entire lifetime just studying the recent history and the occupants and the clashes of the cultures and different people moving in there, looking for treasure and buried artifacts. But when you start to look at the ancient history, like Jordan was talking about the petroglyphs and different things, those could go back thousands of years, and who knows if it does tie into the Aztecs or other different lost empires or cultures that moved through the area or traded throughout the region that we just have no historical record of other than these trace evidences of. But it's very interesting when you get up to these locations like Blind Frog Ranch and around in those canyons, how much of the different levels of folklore and the myth and the locals, and when you talk to them, how much of it all pieces together, and you realize how much was really going on up in this region and how much could still be hidden around as far as ancient relics and artifacts and all sorts of interesting stuff.
Well, and you guys have found, and I believe I'm speaking, I know for a fact, James and Carl, you've seen pictographs and things like that. Have you, Jordan?
Are you talking about like petroglyphs and everything?
Petroglyphs, sorry, yes.
Absolutely. I mean, we spent a lot of times as kids and as adults just kind of exploring it. There is no end to it. I mean, you can literally walk out in any direction and find something. I mean,
so that seems crazy to me. It's like a normal thing. If you're growing up in that area, there's so many things that are just normal to you guys that are certainly not normal to everyone else. And I think that's why Mystery of Blind Frog Ranch and the story is so compelling to people, because this isn't normal for the rest of people, the population. So with that, let's get into some of the things that happened on the show. Guys, the show, of course, is heading in the right direction towards what everybody wants. We want to get down into those caverns. We want to see what's going on. I want to recap a little bit of what happened at the very beginning of the show. Gotta love Duane, right? Duane just was like antsy. He's like, okay, enough of this trying to figure it out. Let's just drill. Let's drill. And he gets the rat rig out, picks a spot, and just drills. And unfortunately, it's very costly to do this. I mean, it is crazy expensive to run those rigs. They didn't find anything. And of course, that's a bummer. Chad called it. He said, look, my dad pulled the trigger too early. There's nothing there. We just need to get boots on the ground and go out and search. Now, Chad, from the previous episode, had seen what he thought was an opening out on the back of one of those mountains or tops, and wants to go out and explore. Now he found smelters. Let's talk about this for a second, because in the last episode, the one prior to last week, he found the one. In this episode, as they go back up to that area, they found another and another and another, and basically they found like 4 smelters right there in a row, right there in that one concentrated area. Jordan, I'll go to you first. Have you run across this in that basin too?
Yes. You do see smelters fairly common around the basin, especially up there in the Uintah Mountains up there. There's quite a few mining operations that go back to they might go back to the Spanish days. They could go back even farther, and it's clearly an area that's been under the radar and it's been under the sights of many prospects.
That seems nuts to me, but
it's not surprising to me to see it. It is surprising to see so much in a small space. I will say that.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the points that they brought up. And actually, Eric brought up something that I want to ask James about here real quick. Eric said, well, a lot of times they would build like these honeycomb looking, type of smelters, and they're normally bigger. This was kind of a small one, right? But he brought up an interesting point. We don't know how old it is, right? The bigger ones are from a certain time period. These smaller ones may be from way further back. And one was right up against the kind of almost like a cave-like area, a little cut out in the rock, if you will, which may have been used as kind of a makeshift kiln. James, in your research, what have you found about how far back this goes?
Yeah, so when you speak to the Utah Territory Indians, again, which were the Paiute and the Shoshone, not the Ute, they talk about telling the Spaniards when they came, the Big Hats is who they called them, that there were already mines and smelters available, that they just needed to be reopened. So it kind of makes you wonder who the heck was doing this before the Spaniards, because the Native Americans had no need for mining operations. They didn't believe in destroying the land in that way. And you talk to the Navajo, and they tell you it's the Starnake, which are giants, a specific group of giants that were white, red hair, or blonde haired. They had tools that made sound, which means it was either pneumatic or electric or hydraulic. So you're like, well, how the heck is that possible 1,000 years ago? So you're getting into a history that's been either suppressed or lost. And to Jordan's point, he had said earlier, just east of Blind Frog Ranch, there's Smelter Creek. Well, guess where it got its name from? Because there's a huge smelter that was there. It's a lot of it's missing now, but it's so old that it's not completely there. And then there's another smelter just west of Blind Frog Ranch, which definitely looks to be probably from the 17 or 1800s. So maybe Spaniard, possibly Mexican in origin. But you go a little farther north, and there's a smelter that I'm really interested in who designed it, because it's of no design that would match the De Re Metallica, which is the book that the Spaniards used for all mining operations since about the 1580s. So it's very interesting. And in regards to Blind Frog Ranch, there's so many shelters, meaning not quite a cave, but an ingress location that while we were there, we saw a lot of these burn marks going up and down the rocks. And it's still something that I want to look into further when I'm there this summer, maybe take some samples, see if there's a possibility of doing a stratigraphic dig and seeing how far down we can go and if we can catalog everything and then get it organic material, get carbon-14 dated. So that's an ongoing process.
Yeah, you touched on so much that actually we're going to explore a little bit more because of what happened in last night's show. All those little areas you said, like little mini caves or mini, that are hidden in the brush and stuff, that comes into play here in this episode because there's a little bit of a heated battle going on right now between Eric and Chad about just getting up their boots on ground to find things, which is what Chad wants to do. Chad wants to get a whole team out there of guys to just comb the area and try and find things. Because we all know, all four of us have been out on that ranch, and we know it is not easy to walk. It is hard terrain. You can't see everything. You could be standing right here and not see what's 15 feet from you because of the way that the hill is, or because of the way that the bushes are, or whatever. So it's harder than it sounds. But that's what Chad wants to do. And then, of course, Eric wants to take the scientific approach and use his radiation testing. And there's another test that he did, and I want to ask about that here in a second. But if it were you guys out there, I have to ask. I think I already know Carl's answer. It's boots on the ground, walk around until you can't walk anymore, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I want to take equipment and drones and film it all, and and have a whole team of people. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Jordan, would you lean more towards the technology or just walking around?
I mean, I feel like walking around, you're going to be able to go out and fill out the land a little bit more and kind of get to be able to, get into those crevices and kind of see with your person. Talking about technology is good and it's a good asset to have, but having boots on the ground, that's always your best option, in my opinion, or a good combination.
Okay, I agree. And James, I know that you are a 50-50 camp, right? You really love exploring, but you know your technology, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely, you have to be boots on the ground, but it's technology based for me. So it would be, using long range type of equipment, maybe acoustic sensing equipment for underground to sense and lead and direct the way. We found quite a bit of voids and cavities that remain to be looked at that we've marked with the technology. And obviously the boots on the ground is next. Everything's been non-invasive to this point. So, at what point do we want to invade deeper into the ground?
Okay. So with that, I want to ask you about the technology they did use, James. The little bit of heated discussion basically ended in Duane telling Eric, go ahead and do your one more test. And then if that doesn't reveal anything, we're going to go ahead and get boots on the ground and do Chad's way. So he laid out sensors and did a shotgun down into the ground, which allows him to measure the space. Can you tell us how that works for those of us that don't know that technology that well?
Yeah, there's there's directional acoustic detection. One of those ways is to fire into the ground some type of device, and you're going to create PNS waves to a certain degree, depending on how far out they go and are they, what direction they're traveling. Is it horizontal? It's looking at depth. Is it shallow or is it deeper? And what it does is it comes across cavities or voids, and there's an acoustic difference in those waves. Either they be more shallow or they be larger based upon what they're traveling through. Obviously, a cavity, it's easier to travel through. So you're going to have this anomalous area in space that's not matching what's below your feet. And that's what you want to mark as a potential of being a cavity or a void, and something that needs to be looked at to a greater degree at a later date.
Okay, and that's exactly what they did. They found that, or they believe that this revealed that there is an air pocket down there, but it's about 85 feet down. So the chances, and this is where I'm thinking as I'm watching this, like I'm sure the rest of America is thinking when they're watching this, what is there going to be a dry entrance, or are they going to have to dig to get to it, right? Thus enters the bats. So let's talk about this for a second. Early in the show, the bats come up and they're flying around. There's a bunch of bats, and so of course Eric and Chad have a conversation. Well, that's further proof that there's caves around here, because where do caves live? In bats. And then they run across this dead bat that's laying there. Jordan, I have to ask you. You grew up in this area. You run across bats often?
In that number, yes, I'm sure you do if you look in the right places. But personally, I've never seen a swarm that big. That was pretty big.
Yeah.
Whatever that entrance was, whatever that mine was, whatever that was, must be, in my opinion, I would imagine it's pretty large.
And that was my thoughts exactly. And so I have a grandfather that had some property, and there were bats out in that property. And I do have to say that this came to mind. People immediately think, okay, open cavity, mine, whatever. That makes sense. However, what people don't always think about is all of those could have crawled out through a tiny little hole behind brush, because bats are like rats. They can fit through small spaces. And just because they live in a underground doesn't mean the opening is big enough for us to just walk through. So, I love the idea of going out there and walking around until you find a nice little convenient walk-in, cave, but that may not be the case. What do you guys think? Carl, James, you guys, either one of you pipe in. Do you think that there may be just a walk-in area, or it could just be that they're coming out of a small little opening? What do you think?
I honestly think you might be surprised when you get out there on foot and get walking around, how much little pocket cave entrance that opens up into a giant entrance could be anywhere out there and go completely unnoticed or missed if you don't actually look at it at the right time of day or from the right angle or know the approach. And you do have to kind of just get out there and get hiking around and look at it and think about it, how primitive people would have even lived and walked through the area. Sometimes even, I know that the geology changes, but I'll even take my shoes and socks off and walk around, and I try to think like I'm following animals or looking for waterways and get at a higher elevation. So yeah, I think if you got actually exploring around and then backing that up with your technology and scanning the earth and using drones and all of that, I think you have a really good idea of where to actually look. And so there could be an actual entrance on the surface that's been hidden or covered up. There could even be fake entrances, or ones that have shifted and been buried in as well. But it's very possible.
And that's exactly what Chad is expecting and wanting to find. And how glorious would that be, right? That they wouldn't have to dig down deep to find it. Okay, so you got to love live shows, guys. I'm so glad I'm not actually on the actual show. I think somebody so nicely pointed out that a few minutes ago I said caves live in bats. Said bats live in caves. Thank you for that, by the way. So yeah, guys, I want to talk about the bat for a second that they found that was dead and radiation. I've been out on the ranch. It's perfectly safe. There's no radiation signatures that can hurt people. We have people come out to the ranch all the time. But I'm learning too that radiation can be a natural occurring thing. in caves, and that's why they're looking for that. James, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So radon gases are probably what you'd want to watch out for. Anything underground, if you have a basement or a sub basement, you trap a lot of radon gas that comes in at that level, and it's the same underground. And in regards to other types of radiation, I mean, there's obviously natural radiation if there was uranium deposits or something like that. But that's what dosimeters are for, and they're placed all around to watch for that type of issue. And I've had people and I've seen them talk about iridium because iridium is so abundant on the ranch. But you have to remember that iridium in its natural form, you can hold it and it doesn't matter. It doesn't do anything. It has to be altered by man in order to get to that point to where there's the possibilities of damage or to human beings. But yeah, I'd be more worried about other things when I'm in the cave, like oxygen, or some type of other gas before being irradiated by anything.
That's interesting. So last season we saw there's iridium. They haven't really touched much on that recently. Now that we're finding the smelters, and now that we're finding, gallium, right? There's all these different things. Does any of this start to add up? I mean, I'm no geologist, but I mean, it's kind of crazy that we're finding so many of these different things in one property, right?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. That's just the fact that we're seeing the smelters, we're seeing the Native American beads, we're seeing, potentially a Spanish presence, potentially that deep Native American presence that we really don't know too much about. And then we're seeing things like gallium and iridium on the ranch. I'd say that's pretty unusual. And
Well,
I think it warrants a bigger search. I'm happy that it's happening.
okay, so Jordan, I'm gonna keep with you on this one because we're getting lots of questions about this. So last week's episode, they had Black Hawk helicopters flying over in a formation. Your Army, right? So you and I don't claim to know anything about any branch, what does what, who uses which helicopters, or anything like that. But at the exact same time that happened, on the other side of the ranch, their tents were ransacked. And in last week's show, we even talked about there's been several times that James and Carl and several others went out there investigating, have had helicopters roll up on them. To me, and this is just my question to you, that's an expensive endeavor to send out helicopters just to fly low across somebody's property. Why would they do that? Who would do that? I mean, I'm not suggesting you know the answer, but what are your thoughts?
Honestly, my thoughts as a helicopter pilot myself in the Army, I think that those were most likely training helicopters flying from one location to the other.
Okay.
Because you've got them out of Salt Lake. But the interesting thing about that is why would they take that specific path? And that's what has me really questioning a lot of it. And not to mention a lot of things that seem to happen around the Uintah Basin really don't have a real answer to it. You might see helicopters, but yet there's no record of helicopters being found. So in my mind, I go, okay, they're either flying through training, or there's something really bizarre going on to where the two situations of the area being ransacked and seeing the helicopters are somehow connected. So for me, it's kind of a toss-up. I'm not sure if it was just they're on their way to training and flying in that training formation,
Right.
Maybe going to Colorado or something, or if it just has to do with the high strangeness of the area.
Yeah, and it's definitely strange that it happened at the same time. And then, of course, Charlie Boy brought up at that time, and I realize I'm talking about last week's episode, but it's appropriate here because they're further trying to figure out why are we being watched closely and who is doing it, right? Because there's no doubt they're being watched because someone was on their property, someone went through their stuff at the same time. And Charlie Boy brought up, hey, when you see these things, they may not be doing anything other than distracting us from what's going on over here, right?
I mean, I couldn't agree more. And if you look at, the previous three-letter organizations that have been to the Uintah Basin to study the Uintah Basin. There's some really big secret squirrel stuff going on around there. People just really aren't aware.
Interesting. Crazy. Carl, you mentioned a story a while back that you were out looking at some of the petroglyphs and had a helicopter roll up on you, and you had, prior to that happening, you said you had a feeling of being watched, right?
Yeah, the feeling of being watched happens a lot when I get into some of those locations, like the ancient spots with the petroglyphs, and there is like a weird resonance and a harmony to them where when you get back in there, there's echoing that goes on. And even when you're by yourself, a lot of times you'll feel like there's several people around, because your own voice will echo back around on the rocks and give you a strange sensation of not being alone or being watched or something. But just the ancient historical significance of it is really odd as well. When you get in there, you can sense it and feel like there's been people that have lived here for maybe thousands of years or come through here, or something interesting really was happening. But yeah, I've been at a location before and had helicopters fly over and kind of circle over, two of them, Black Hawk helicopters, really, really interesting. And I don't know if it was, like Jordan said, just coincidence where they were flying a training route and I just happened to be there. But it definitely makes you wonder. And I try to hide from them and kind of just not act too suspicious and just let them fly over. But I've never had any kind of bad things happen. Even over around Area 51, when you have the white Ford Raptors that drive past you, I've never had anybody be hostile towards me or anything. Everybody's been nice so far.
Yeah, and I think everybody's in agreement on this one statement. I'm going to share this from a fan here. If you feel like you're being watched, you probably are, right? Now, the question is who's doing that watching and why, right? And Jordan, I know that in your investigations up there or in your excursions, if you will, you've experienced a lot of things that you really can't explain. Do you want to share anything in particular?
Oh, sure. Actually, near the ranch, it was about 10 or 15 miles west. No, it was west over in Uintah Canyon. Actually, it was really interesting. Myself and three other people just went out, and eventually, towards the end of the night, we started to get on a really deep conversation of things UFO related, and that seems to always lighten the atmosphere to make something happen. I've noticed around there. We ended up interacting with probably about 40 or 50 orbs on the side of a mountain, and it was quite a bizarre event. It was really beautiful, though. Actually, it was quite a meaningful event for those of us involved in it. At one point, this very large orange sphere kind of appeared and started scanning all the other orbs and whatnot. The whole thing probably lasted about an hour and a half. To us, it felt more like 20 minutes. So it was quite an interesting event. But that's one of dozens around here.
So it's a lot to take in if you're not from the area. But I'm going to repeat something that I said earlier that is absolutely true. You growing up in this area, anybody that spent a lot of time in this area, there's a normal for you guys that just isn't the same everywhere else, right? You're not shocked by this sort of thing at all, are you?
No, and it was funny when I actually joined the Army at 18. I thought that everybody had stuff like that happen, and I would tell them about it, and they'd look at me like I was crazy. I soon found out that maybe I was crazy, But the research shows that the place is indeed a paranormal, enigma. So it's worthy of research at all times. So I'm glad to see everybody out and about and doing their due part in research.
I want to show this one from a fan here. I remember there was a lady on the panel who said that she heard and felt wind of a helicopter, but there was nothing there visually. We have had that conversation in a previous show, and this is not the first time that I've heard of just strange things happening in that area. And they allude to that on the show, and we've already seen some strange things. I mean, I thought in the first season it was strange enough that they're doing actual alchemy there, right? That to me is strange. This is beyond, Okay, so I need to rein this back to a couple of things I want to just for a moment touch on. We always have a very short amount of time because there's so much that we can do. But I do want to touch for a second on Jamie is up there continuing his security and his investigation into the girl that was found. In previous episodes, we know that there was a girl that was up there that either was murdered or suicide or something. And we really don't have any new news on that. He's interviewing people in the area. All of that seems very strange. But I do want to say that I'm hoping that they come to a resolve on that particular investigation. But I want to point out another gentleman says, look, there's just too many coincidences. Whether training flight, camera found, REM-sacking crew, the mysterious suicide, EMTs. No record of the incident. There's just too much stuff that doesn't add up, and I think that's why this whole story is so compelling. You've got Duane and Chad really trying to push to find what's in and on their land, and then all this just craziness is happening around them. So that's why you guys are here, Jordan. I know that. Let me ask you this. When you find these things and you're out in these areas, are you the type that's so curious that you now have to find the reasoning, you have to find what's going on, or do you just walk away going, hey, this is really awesome? What's your initial, passion?
I'm a person who likes to go out and see this stuff. I really do. I hope every time that I go out, we see some sort of archaeological discovery. We see some sort of paranormal happening. I almost have to take the attitude of accepting that and appreciating that. And I think when people go out and they appreciate the history of the land, it comes back and gets back to them tenfold, rather than somebody who might go out and see something and be scared away or decide not to look into it. So I really do think that the land is pretty alive and looking for people to go out and explore and get to know it. I mean, it's an amazing place. It really is. You just have to experience it to know it.
That's an interesting way that you say that the land is alive and wanting people to explore it. And obviously there's some people that want to keep people from exploring it, or at least monitor what they're doing, right?
I agree. Yeah.
Carl, you made almost the same statement once, that you felt like the land is talking to you, right?
Yeah, there's like a sense of presence or like being watched. A lot of times I'll find myself approaching like an ancient dwelling site and I'll just start talking out loud, like intuitively, like I'm approaching someone else's home, almost like a trespasser. And it's almost like a strange time anomaly where you feel like they're still dwelling there right alongside you, and you're just kind of walking up, experiencing it in your own way from a different perspective or a different time. And so I do try to respect all of those locations and interesting spots when I go there, and try to sense why they picked these locations and why the ancient inhabitants dwelled there and what they were doing. Just to jump back a little bit, we were talking earlier about the smelting and the different types of mining operations that were going on. We know that there was the mining that was happening for just the precious minerals and the gold and different things, but it does make you wonder if there was older, more ancient cultures that were tapped into these earth energies and earth radiations, and they were building sort of ancient relics or what we would consider ancient technology and utilizing it as a part of their belief systems or culture at the time that we just don't understand. So we don't really know why they were doing what they were doing, especially what a focal point Blind Frog Ranch and that whole region is up there. But it does seem like there's a lot going on above and below ground. It's really fascinating.
Well, and one of our fans just stated this, and I couldn't agree more. The history is key to this, and most important thing to document. James, I'm going to turn to you on this because you've actually done several reports on the history, specifically, the Native Americans, the difference of Ute versus who was really there. Can you speak on that for a second?
Yeah, what a lot of people fail to understand is that the Ute majority of them were in Colorado and New Mexico until around 1860 when they created the Ute Reservation. What we need to focus in on, and I even made that mistake for a long time, but what we need to focus on are Utah Territory Indians, which are the Shoshone and the Paiute. A specific tribe of the Shoshone would be the Timpanogos. I think their oral tradition is rich in what's really taking place here because the Timpanogos is Chief Wakara. And Chief Wakara seems to have this huge attachment to not just Kershanab or treasures, or what a lot of us haven't really thought about is Blind Frog Ranch happens to look like it's on some type of major trail system, not just an old Spanish trail, but indigenous people or other prior to this. And we have to look at the wording of certain information given to us by the native, like Ker Shenab. That origin is actually ancient Gaelic from the Welsh, which is Carrig. And Shenab is actually ancient Hebrew. So what the hell are they doing using ancient Gaelic and Hebrew in
that makes no sense.
The Nubic language? Yeah, the Uto-Aztecan language. And you want to talk about a connection to the Aztec? Well, the Aztec language of Nahua is very similar to Shoshone and Paiute and Ute. It's a Uto-Aztecan language known as Numic. So why? How did that occur? And you got to look at this distribution that a lot of the Native Americans were originally Toltec, and they originated from Mexico northwards. But then there's this push of Native Americans that originated north and ended up as Aztec as they migrated south. So there's this constant connectivity for thousands of miles. And it's running along this trail system that has crossed through Blind Frog Ranch, maybe another ranch that we know of, and other interesting areas. You wonder why this is UFO Alley. Why are all these anthropomorphic and zoomorphic figures in the petroglyphs that really don't make sense when we look at them? Why? Why all these connections? And I think that we have to look at the Native American connection to see what's below and above.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important thing to remember, what's below and above, right? I mean, we already know, even from the show, first season, they said, we know there's 2 miles plus of caverns under the property of Blind Frog Ranch, right? The question is, were those maybe used as part of the trails? It's conceivable that, the trails that were being used weren't above ground. Is it not?
Yeah, it's you would think if you're living in a harsh climate, is it better to live above ground or below ground? A smarter individual would definitely choose below ground, because not only do you have safety, you have cooler temperatures, but you have running water through a majority of these cavern systems in the Uintah Mountains and the basin. So you have this fresh water system that nobody even realizes above ground. And what better way to work through a mine than to already enter somewhere that is a dry entrance, So when you're talking about dry entrance, you got to look at it in that fact too, or that perspective, that maybe you can initially find or locate something below ground and then spread out underneath ground through that original entrance.
Well, and let me ask you, all three of you, another question. So one of the things that they're finding, and the fact that there's a below ground and there's so much going on in water, and there's different minerals, we know there's iridium, we know there's gallium. One of the things that they tested in this last night's show was magnetic, right? So they're looking into the magnetic pole of things, and there was one scene also where the compass, Eric's compass, was wigging out on him and wasn't working right, and he wasn't near any machinery or anything that could have caused that. So can Jordan, in the military, do you guys regularly use or have anything to do with magnetic anomalies that come from the ground that aren't man-made?
Well, I would say in my 10 years in the military, I've never once had a compass malfunction. You know, being in the infantry for 10 years prior to being a pilot, that's all we do is trek out through the woods with a compass and a map and, you know, trek our way around. And I've never seen magnetic
because you can count on it, right?
Right. But in the Uintah Basin and on Blind Frog Ranch, that's something completely different.
Okay. James, Carl, both of you guys have been on the ranch. You've had problems with your technology. I've had problems with my technology. Do you think it's related to magnetic, and where would that magnetic come from?
Go ahead, James.
You want me to take that one? Okay.
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, 100%. So a major focus in my hypothesis deals with these magnetic atypical readings and what that really entails. And I look at it in two different ways. First, there's this transient atypical reading that's magnetic below, and it's constantly shifting. How the heck that occurs, I've kind of zeroed in on thinking that it's dealing with the water. If we have hard water, you know, running below, it's obviously able to carry more of an electrical current, and maybe there's that shift from magnetic to EMF to an electromagnetic. But is it naturally occurring because of different types of rocks underground? And if so, you know, that could also let us know what kind of mineralization has occurred. Or is there some type of massive natural or unnatural artifact that's magnetic below ground in the basin? Meaning two possibilities. One could have been a meteorite or an asteroid strike, which is a really good possibility. The other is, you got to look at the fault system that's running through the Uintah Mountains. And then nobody seems to be talking about the fact that there's tons of micro faults all beneath Blind Frog Ranch that run north, south, and east, west. And where does mineralization occur? On faults. What better place to create a place where you're going to live, a place where you're going to mine, a place where Mexicans all the way from Central America can get their gold from, because really in Mexico, the only place to really get gold is out of the state of Oaxaca. And they had far more gold than could have ever been brought from there. So where would it have come from? What would have come from origin for them, which was here in northeastern Utah? So there's just so much moving parts. And I think that bits and pieces of all of this come into play in finding out exactly what's going on. And it encompasses more than just treasure. We may be talking about sitting upon an origin site or some type of site that goes past what we consider Native American, and what kind of lost technology, artifacts, historical data can be found. We have a group of people living there, LDS Mormon, that have based a whole entire religion on finding indigenous people's historical data on copper, brass, gold plates. Well, these have been found throughout the Americas. Why would this group of individuals have wanted to move specifically to the state of Utah? And we've heard constant historical data, Brewer's Cave in Manti, of finding these plates, the plates in Colorado and Missouri and Ohio. So maybe this is being suppressed, lost because of a catastrophic event, or maybe we're looking at a group of individuals that are helping keep this the secret. And we have to really look at that point and say, keeping that secret, I understand if they think that that's part of their culture and their civilization and it's dutiful, but at some point, maybe that could affect the entire humanity, all of humankind, in finding some type of artifact that tells us who we are, at least where we came from, where we originated, and maybe for the fact that there was a lot more trading going on throughout the world than what we've been told to this point. And maybe it wasn't just trade in goods that could be handed out, but maybe we're talking about languages and history and religion, everything, all types of information.
Well, and this exactly what you just stated, James, is the answer as to why there are people interested in what's going on there, which is why they're being watched. And we've had several people say, hey, maybe the malfunctions in technology while you're on there are not just related to what's going on there, but maybe it's technology that others are using against you when you're there, because there's two schools of thoughts here on most of the comments that we're getting. One is, are they watching you to see what you're doing, or are they watching you to keep you from uncovering what they already know is there, right? And we don't know who they is, but we know there's somebody, right? I got a comment here I want to share here from somebody. 2016, I was in a dinosaur national park by a river with my students. Helicopters flew over. I took photos, but my phone was messed up while they were in the area. Okay, so couple things. Helicopters showing up, why? Secondly, why is the technology not working? And why is it around these anthropology type of sites, which I guess that's exactly what Blind Frog Ranch is at this point, where, they're looking for something there. And, who are these people? Who is the they that knows that something's out there? And can they stop our equipment from working? I don't know.
Yeah, I think James summarized a lot of it really well. And it's fascinating when you look at like the kind of the secret programs that revolved around these locations up in the Uintah Basin. They all have different code names that are like have to do with gravity or different programs that make you wonder, like if James said, if there is a natural geological element to it that exhibits strange energy waves or time anomalies or glitches in reality or something that we don't quite understand, or if the fact that it does create spots like on Blind Frog Ranch where there is apparent forms of alchemy, maybe these spots were known to certain ancient cultures once they figured it out, and so they were occupying many of these locations and leaving their marks. And maybe they understood that, where they could take certain minerals or mercury or other sorts of elements or gallium and bring them to these zones, and then they would watch them transform and use it for other purposes that we don't understand. And they could be ancient technology or types of relics or devices that we don't understand now, because they were harnessing the natural power of these energy zones and transformation zones that we are just trying to uncover again, and what Duane has stumbled across on the ranch up there.
Well, and it goes back to one of the things that has been well talked about on that ranch is those energy zones. We know there's energy zones there. That's how Duane explains that they can do alchemy in that one energy area. He's smelted normal sand that has zero signature of ore or metal of any kind, but when in that energy zone, it becomes metal. That's insane to me. And that's obviously a natural occurring of somehow energy that we don't understand yet, right? And I know, Jordan, this seems normal to you because of how you grew up and where you're at, but man, this stuff is not normal.
It's awesome. It's awesome. I mean, if anybody has a chance to ever make it out to the Uintah Basin, I'd say just go with a clean slate, go physically, mentally, spiritually, cleanse yourself before you go, and go and experience it for yourself. It is a truly bizarre, mysterious place.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I'm going to use that to invite everybody to come up to Blind Frog Ranch Outpost. It's on Main Street in Vernal. That's where we've got all of the gear, all the cool stuff you can grab. But you can book a tour, go out to the ranch. Like I said, we're opening up tentatively April 1st through 16th, and May 18th through summer. Of course, dependent on good weather. But right now you can pre-order a tour, and then fill in your dates later as we lock in those dates. But real quick, guys, we've only got a minute left. I want to thank you so much for sharing so much incredible information. I personally didn't know hardly anything before getting involved in this project about what's going on up there. And you guys are just so beautifully equipped with knowledge about this. And I thank you. Jordan, again, thank you for your service. We appreciate the hard work you do in the Army there, and we appreciate that you're willing to come on and talk to us about this fun stuff.
Hey, thank you very much. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that's involved in the Uintah Basin and the Uintah Basin research. I think it's going to be research that really stands the test of time, and I think it's going to teach us a lot. So thank you.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you so very much. James and Carl, you guys are amazing. I love you guys. Every single week, you guys tell me things that I had no clue of. I think that this learning experience is truly owes you because you guys are bringing some really great stuff. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.
All right. And with that, guys, we're going to close this thing out. Appreciate every single one of you. You fans are amazing. Mystery at Blind Frog Ranch. To be sure not to miss it. It's on Discovery. That is the show that we're talking about. Discovery is doing an amazing job. Carcass 7's doing an amazing job. And of course, we're from we're from Blind Frog Ranch Outpost. Go to blindfrogranchoutpost.com. Check everything out there. Go ahead and go there and get your steel mug, guys. That's the one that's on sale right now. And we will see you guys next week.